always knew changes were coming to Bryant-Denny in 2020. We just didn't know it'd be during a pandemic. Today, Alabama gets to show off $100 million worth of renovations, and the AD, Greg Byrne, gives us an exclusive inside look. 2 weeks into the season, is it already a must-win game for the Auburn Tigers? And here is what's worse. There could be one Georgia player who's never played a single snap that can make all the difference tonight. And at UAB, it's the one day every year where the name on the back of the jersey means more than the name on the front, and why kids all over Central Alabama will have a giant smile on their faces today.
You're watching CBS 42 College Football Saturday pregame, presented by Pepsi.
Bryant-Denny Stadium is the place to be today, but how different will the atmosphere look with new social distancing changes in 2020? Alabama, Texas A&M is the SEC on CBS Game of the Week, coming up at 2:30.
And it's homecoming at UAB, the annual Children's Harbor game for the Blazers. They'll also be honoring one of their brothers, Alan Merrick, who never got the opportunity to suit up for the green and gold. That story coming up on the pregame show.
We sure do have a lot to get to here on College Football Saturday. Chris Brees, Simone Eli, Drew Carter will join us. I still cannot get over the fact that when we saw this new schedule back in July, how strange week 2 feels like. Alabama, Texas A&M is so early, and then Auburn, Georgia, it feels like it's preseason.
It's crazy. We got to week 1, now we're in week 2, and we have these like week 7 matchups. It's unbelievable that we already have such hard-hitting games. And I'm kind of glad because last week, it kind of got off to a rougher start. Obviously, the matchups were not as hard-hitting, but this week, man, it gets crazy. I can't wait.
They whet their appetite. We whet our appetite as well. And you want to talk about feeling later in the year? It's definitely feeling later in the year weather-wise. Ashley Gann has a look at today's forecast across the state.
Well, here's a look at your game day forecast for Central Alabama. We are looking at sunshine in Tuscaloosa. Big matchup today. Alabama home game against Texas A&M and seeing sunshine, and it's all the feels of fall. Kickoff time, 2:30. Kickoff temperature, 75 degrees. Low 70s by the final whistle. A bit cooler for Auburn fans heading to Athens. That kickoff temperature will be at 66 for this 6:30 p.m. kickoff. Halftime at 57, falling into the mid-50s by the final whistle.
And Alabama, Texas A&M may be the headline, but a ton of action across the state. UAB's game with UT San Antonio currently in progress at Legion Field. Jacksonville State kicks off the first of its 4-game fall schedule on the road against Florida State, and the big nightcap features a top 7 showdown. Auburn at Georgia. It means the world for Auburn if they want to win the SEC West title. Meanwhile, here in Alabama, the big story in Tuscaloosa, Jimbo Fisher can finally break a streak that just feels like it's never going to end. Nick Saban's 19-0 against his former assistants, and every year we say the same thing. When will this streak end? Well, if you just look at the head coaches he's beaten time and time again, it is an impressive list. Jimbo and Kirby Smart are considered 2 of the best in the game, and Jeremy Pruitt has turned things around at Tennessee in just 2 seasons. They're a top 20 team right now. All of them are winless against their former boss. Drew Carter with us now live from the stadium. Drew, these games get a ton of attention every year, but how much do you think these head coaches actually look into, hey, I'm playing my former boss, I got to beat him?
Well, Chris, I think they care less about that, and I think they might just be tired of hearing the question because they get it every week. Jimbo Fisher got it this week, and even before last season at SEC Media Days, which feels like forever ago. Remember when SEC Media Days actually happened in person? Well, before the 2019 season, Jimbo Fisher was asked about that perfect Saban record. His answer was pretty funny.
Jimbo, I'm sure you heard this statistic that Nick is 16-0 against former assistants. What's it going to do?
I have never heard that.
Okay.
They say the first step in solving a problem is recognizing that one exists. Jimbo Fisher has had as many cracks at his old boss as anyone in the Saban coaching tree, but the same luck.
And the clock will wind down. We will meet Jimbo Fisher at midfield and say, you guys got a pretty good football team, but not quite as good as mine.
Listen, they've established a culture of winning and playing great football, and they've established that over a long period of time.
and Nick's got that established there. So, I mean, that's the first thing because they understand how to win. They're very sound. You know, you got guys that are playing very well, and they know how to win, and they're very well coached.
Fisher said that this week. Before the matchup last year, our very own Simone Eli asked Saban about his favorite Fisher memories.
He was always on my noontime basketball league. He could shoot threes. He was a really good competitor, and we had a hell of a record. He did a really good job of coaching, but my best memory is us, you know, winning at noontime. And, you know, he could talk a little stuff, too, you know, to the other team, which he didn't learn from me, incidentally.
All right, so Jimbo might not have learned that from Coach Saban, but he certainly learned a lot. This is a national champion head coach at Florida State we're talking about. But remember when we said step one is recognizing the problem exists? According to Fisher, step two is playing a full 60 minutes, coming into these games against Alabama, expecting to win, which might be hard considering that 0-19 record we just talked about. But he says, hey, Alabama's a football team. They've got their ups, they've got their downs. No downs so far for Nick Saban against his former assistants, Chris.
Simone, do you remember asking that question?
I do. I absolutely do. I was nervous about his answer, but it was great.
You blacked out. Saban's assistants feel a lot like Auburn does when they play a game at Georgia. Do you realize the Tigers have not won in Athens since 2005 when Tommy Tuberville was the coach? And most of these games have not even been close. Average score 32-13. So Auburn's offense between the hedges, not very good.
You're looking at a team that's probably the most talented team overall in the SEC. Very well coached. You know, you look at them defensively, they're very sound. They make you earn stuff. They don't give up a whole lot of big plays. They got most of their defensive back. But I will tell you this, our guys are extremely excited to be going there and playing Georgia.
In the SEC, it just means more, right? Well, on the Plains, some wins mean more. Not a whole lot of them for Auburn during Gus Malzahn's tenure. Their three biggest rivalries since 2013, LSU, Georgia, Alabama, 22 games. They've won just a total of 7 times. So it brings us to the obligatory segment every single year.
Yes.
Early on in the year. On the bus, off the bus, must win for Gus.
Yeah.
Dr. Seuss rhyme time. What do you think?
I think that you've really got this dad thing down with your rhyming and reading books.
I do not like green eggs and ham.
Sam, I am. Well, listen, I think that there's pressure on Gus Malzahn because there's always pressure on Gus Malzahn. But it's not any different in this Week 2 game against a huge rival than it is in previous seasons. To go on the road and to win this game would be huge for the Auburn program. So, of course, there's going to be pressure not only internally but from the fan base because it's Georgia and because it's a rivalry game.
And to me, it seems like you have less margin of error to lose in the SEC and still win the SEC title than playing for the national championship because the odds of 2 SEC teams making the college football playoff are pretty good. The odds of Auburn losing this game and still making the SEC title, not very good.
Yeah, I mean, with the year being so weird, this game being so early, you want to say it's a must-win because of what's still ahead, the unknowns, 8 weeks of games still, Alabama, really tough games on the schedule. So it would be a huge victory for Auburn if they can get it done on the road. It won't be easy.
And we've already seen Gus Malzahn get really heated and animated Week 1 against Kentucky last week. That halftime debacle where Mark Stoops also kind of lost his mind. What was going through those head coaches' minds? Well, we're going to answer that next because Sanford's coach Chris Hatcher will be with us on a brand new segment here on College Football Saturday. We go inside the mind of a big-time college football coach, and even though they cannot go into the game, most of them, Bama fans got to show their spirit somehow and make it a memorable experience. So why not the R&R Cigar Bar? They're hosting a socially distant watch party today. We'll be right back.
You're watching CBS 42 College Football Saturday pregame, presented by Pepsi.
Well, as you know by now, the FCS is going to plan on playing football in the spring. We're all hoping that goes well. But for right now, there's schools like Sanford who are trying to stay positive and get a fall practice schedule in, and that's actually exactly what they're going to do. So we brought Sanford's head coach Chris Hatcher in with us here today on College Football Saturday. Great news for you guys. You got to be happy. You start, what, next week?
We do, Chris. I'm excited. This will be the first time that we put on pads since November 23rd of last season when we played Auburn. Now, we didn't hit very many people that game or make many tackles or move the ball well against those guys, but we're excited. First time we get to get practice and get a little bit of normalcy about ourselves over at Sanford University.
So what's that going to look like? You call it a spring practice. The entire month of October, is it 20 hours?
It is. It's just like practicing in April. We call it the fall spring season right now. So we'll get 15 practices in over the course of the month. We got a new defensive staff, some new players that come in through our signing class, got here this summer that we have not seen play yet. So we're looking forward to it. We're excited, and we'll probably throw a couple scrimmages in there and hopefully have us a little bit of fun this fall.
And the NCAA came out with a plan. It's beginning of February. Tell me about what their schedule is, how many games, when you guys start in the...
Well, what a proposal that's on the table, which I really think is going to happen, is that we would play an 8-game conference schedule in the Southern Conference beginning somewhere in the middle of February. And then the winner of our conference would get the automatic bid. They have moved the playoffs from 24 teams to 16 teams this fall. Be interesting to see how that selection is determined. But right now, though, we're treating the fall like the spring, and we're going to treat the spring like the fall. That's the plan, and that's what we're working towards.
So Coach Hatcher will be here every week to talk about his Sanford Bulldogs, and also a double-edged sword for us because, Coach, we want to go inside the brain of guys like Gus Malzahn last week, and this is a great example. Now, the refs clearly missed that the knee was down at the 1-yard line. They did not call forward progress into the end zone. So Kentucky's coach, Mark Stoops, is really upset about that. Well, it then turned into Gus Malzahn being really upset because what happened on the very next play, not only did Auburn get a pick six going back the other way, a 14-point swing, but they called it a targeting on an Auburn player on a block. So you have two coaches who are absolutely livid. I want to start with Mark Stoops earlier on. Why was he so upset when they're looking at that ruling of not scoring a touchdown?
Well, first of all, I really believe referees are good people, okay? So let's start there, Chris. But I'm sure in the headset his coaches, assistant coaches are telling him, hey, we scored. It's a no-brainer. So when they review the play and they bring it and mark it on the 1-inch line, I'm sure that's what got Mark so excited because the guys in the booth are saying, Coach, there's no way he did not score, no way he didn't score.
Now, we non-football folk have a term called makeup call. You could call this targeting. You could not call it targeting. Is this a makeup call or is this a right call?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on who you're pulling for in the game, okay? and now, I live in a state where Auburn, Alabama, actually coached at Kentucky for 3 years. So I think that has a lot to do with it. The view that we saw just a little while ago, it really looked like targeting. What they look for is a launching and a ducking of the head and leading with the crown to the neck area.
Which you could say on this angle he did.
And you can see him launch, the head goes down, and he strikes the defender to the head and neck area with the crown of the helmet. I think it's a good call. However, if I'm the Auburn coach, I'm upset because it took 7 points off the board. And in any game, especially in an evenly matched SEC contest, to open the season.
It was a one-score game, and it would have been tight down the stretch if that was not the case.
Well, there's no question. And as we know, coaches, they come and go in the SEC. But, sometimes you find yourself doing things like that to keep your team up and excited throughout the course of the game. I know we were getting beat by Florida State when I was at Murray State over 10 years ago, pretty good at the end of the game, and I challenged to play, and the referee came and said, Coach, you're getting beat by 40, and I said, yeah, but I want my fans and players to know that I'm still coaching. I'm still working hard for them. So could be a little bit of act, but I'm sure an assistant was telling him it was a bad call.
Well, you know what? With how big college football is now, you need to be doing that kind of thing because your fan base wants you to win, and we're so happy you're going to be with us here every week. We're going to go inside the mind of a coach with Chris Hatcher every week on College Football Saturday. Simone?
Reese, thanks. Let's head over to Legion Field where UAB is hosting UTSA in their homecoming game. Right now the Blazers lead it 7-3 in the first quarter. Well, UAB head coach Bill Clark loves recruiting in-state players, and Gadsden City High School linebacker Alan Merrick was exactly what Clark was looking for. Less than 2 months ago, Merrick was preparing for his first college football game when an unthinkable tragedy took away that dream. When UAB kicked off the 2020 season against Central Arkansas, they were playing for something bigger than a Week 1 win.
His first game with UAB was going to be September 3rd. My birthday is September the 4th, and he told me, I'm going to do really well in that game, Mom. I said, I just want a quarterback sack.
Katrina Merrick spent years waiting to see her only son, Alan, play college football.
It's just like a family there. Like, I feel like I go there, it's just like being here.
After a decorated high school career at Gadsden City, Alan Merrick earned more than 20 scholarship offers. And last December, he signed with UAB. Staying close to family was a top priority.
You know, me and my mom are like best friends, so she used to come bother me every now and then, you know.
Alan made the short trip from Gadsden to Birmingham to begin his first college workouts.
It was the guy we thought, you know, it was this kind of this gentle giant that, you know, very quiet, you know, all the things we saw in his recruiting, but when you got on the field, you know, you saw that other side of it.
Less than a month before fulfilling his dream of playing college football, Alan took a couple days off from practice because he wasn't feeling well.
Coach Clark allowed him to come home. They thought enough of me as his mom to give him that motherly love, that TLC, but he was going to go back that Sunday.
Just days before Alan was scheduled to go back to Birmingham, Katrina Merrick was finishing her workday, eager to get home to her son in Gadsden.
And that's when I got a phone call, and it was letting me know certain parts of it and stuff, and I didn't understand.
On the other end of the call was the mother of one of Alan's best friends, telling Katrina that her son had been gravely injured by a gunshot.
My mom calls me and she tells me the news, and I'm like, I kept saying, what? Like, you know, that's unbelievable. Like, who would do something like that?
The next few hours are a blur for the Merrick family. Alan was airlifted from Gadsden to UAB Hospital, where he went into emergency surgery.
I was trying to figure out how to get to the hospital, and I could not figure out how to get to the hospital.
She showed up at our building, and we were in meetings, so we all ended up over at the hospital together. Thank God, you know, we were able to be there together because she, you know, the only family she had was her daughters.
At the hospital, UAB doctors delivered the most horrific news any mother, sister, or coach could ever receive.
I said, what are you saying right now? What are you telling us? And he told us, he said, I'm telling you, this is the end of his life. We get to his room and we're calling out his name. Wake up. His heart was beating just fine. He had a strong heart the whole time, but what happened was it wound up piercing through the midbrain, and his brain wasn't sending signals to the rest of his body.
Alan Manuel Merrick Jr. died Friday morning, August 14th, at UAB Hospital. He was just 19 years old.
I always say I have a four-chamber heart, and each of my children has one of those chambers. And when they took my baby, that part of my heart is gone. I refuse to think of him in the past tense because I feel like he's at school and he's gonna come through the door and he's gonna give me a big hug.
In place of hugs from her only son, Katrina Merrick is left with questions. Gadsden police have released very few details regarding Alan's death. All they've said is that it appears to be accidental.
Justice needs to be served. You can't take someone's life and then just move on like it never happened. People need to face consequences. They need to be held accountable for their actions.
Because of the senseless actions of others, Katrina Merrick never had the opportunity to see her son play college football.
I prayed to God for him, and it gave me my son, but he was taken from me it should not have happened, and I felt like it was a reckless act, and he deserved to be here. He deserved to be living his life and enjoying life.
When UAB kicked off the 2020 season, they were playing for something much bigger than a win. They were honoring their brother, Alan Merrick.
Katrina Merrick told me that Bill Clark and other members of the UAB football staff continued to keep in touch with their family, staying true to their commitment. Once a Blazer, always a Blazer.
What a story, Simone. Great job on that. And you know, Merrick's family got honored at the game this morning. We'll bring you that on the post-game show. Kudos to Jacksonville State, because when the OVC canceled conference play for the ball, JSU still saw a way to make it beneficial, and that starts today. The Gamecocks play at Florida State at 3 p.m. It's a game you would usually say is strictly for money, show up, take your whooping, and go home with a ton of cash. But if you've seen Florida State play, that may not be the case.
Most unusual year, that's probably an understatement, you know, to prepare for and get ready for. I mean, we've not treated it exactly like fall camp, but we've been practicing for a long time to get to this point.
Problem for JSU today is that they have not played a game this year. FSU has played 2. Their only home game this fall is next week against Mercer.
You built like Terrence Cody, but you move like Quinnen.
It seems like every single year Alabama is getting some kind of superstar defensive line recruit. You mentioned that kid mentioning Terrence Cody and Quinnen Williams. Well, wait till you see what Ramsey defensive tackle Tim Keenan has in store in our high school player spotlight. Coming up next.
You're watching CBS 42 College Football Saturday pregame, presented by Pepsi.
Well, some of the state's top talent were on full display last night. The CBS 42 High School Game of the Week was a battle of 2 powerhouse programs, Hoover against Hewitt-Trussville. This one was back and forth all night. The Huskies led by 1 at the break and were up 8 in the third quarter, but the Bucks would fight back to win it 29-28. Meanwhile, over at Ramsey High School, they have a star of their own that has already committed to play at Alabama. Some have described him as the next Terrence Cody. CBS 42's Drew Carter went one-on-one with Timothy Keenan.
If you're in the building for a Ramsey football game, it's hard to miss number 55 on the D-line, especially if you're an opposing quarterback.
I like being challenged, but I feel like you shouldn't want to challenge me. That makes sense.
That's Timothy Keenan III. He's one of the most sought-after recruits in the Birmingham area, but he already knows where he's headed next year.
University of Alabama, Roll Tide.
You know, every time I talk to Coach Saban, it's like, you talk with your grandfather, like a genuine talk with your grandfather. He's going to tell you what it is. He's going to tell you what it's not.
Another reason Keenan chose the Tide, to follow in the rather large footsteps of some Bama greats.
Yeah, it was like, you built like Terrence Cody, but you move like Quinnen.
I haven't had a teacher ever tell me that he was a problem. A person that meets him, he never meets a stranger.
I got two different personalities, if that in a good way, On the field, I'm that get at you, but off the field, I'm just nice and this gentle giant and everything. But on that field, I'm gonna give you everything I got, especially with the Alabama on my chest.
One of Timothy's goals with the Tide?
Not letting people cross the 50. It's college, but we at Bama, baby.
Timothy tells me right now he's around 325 pounds, so about 25, 30 pounds away from that Terrence Cody territory. But whether he gets there or not, he should be a force for Alabama in the years to come. Chris, we'll go back to you.
The beasts just keep on coming in Tuscaloosa, and they're going to need guys like Keenan in the next couple of years to face what is clearly Auburn's best player at wide receiver. You saw Seth Williams last year when Bo Nix was a freshman be the go-to guy for him. That is not changing this year, and we saw last week against Kentucky why this guy was so fantastic. He's physical, he's big, 6'3", he's 211 pounds. He uses his size very well just to go up and get the football. 6 catches, 112 yards, 2 touchdowns last week. And Georgia has athletes on defense, especially at cornerback. That's the best way to beat a team like Georgia tonight. Go to Seth Williams. And you know, Williams is going to go to Bryant-Denny Stadium this year later on, and he's going to see a whole lot of new renovations inside that stadium. A lot of the fans can't see what this looks like at some of the restricted areas, so we're going to go inside of it with Alabama's athletic director, Greg Byrne, and tell us why these changes were so necessary for Alabama. It's next on the Pregame Show.
You're watching CBS 42 College Football Saturday Pregame, presented by Pepsi.
We keep saying 2020 is very different, right? Well, this is a live look at Alabama's Walk of Champions, and fans got to get pretty creative, Simone, with how they're going to watch this.
Yeah, they do. Obviously, social distant. Everything in 2020 is that way now. They're not going to be able to do high fives and as much, getting close interaction with players. So you just got to watch from afar is the name of the game in this season.
And it's also going to change the game day atmosphere inside the stadium when they kick off.
What is your DNA as a competitor? Because you can't really count on external factors like, the crowd and the noise and the band and, a lot of those things that, can appeal to your emotion when you're playing in a game.
It is definitely going to feel different today. Some of the biggest changes, capacity inside Bryant-Denny, 20%. No tailgating on campus. They're doing it off campus. A mandatory mask requirement for spectators, and no pregame or halftime performance by the $1 Million Band.
Without them, you're kind of missing you feel empty because you're missing a whole part of the whole experience of Alabama football.
It's definitely disappointing. I was in the concert band last year, and I know these kids love to play, they love to perform.
Now, some of the band will be allowed in the stadium. About 1/4 of the 400 members will perform from the stands. Bryant-Denny Stadium also has some big changes of its own, as you've been hearing about the last 7 months. CBS 42 News anchor Jack Royer has the big unveil.
Yeah, Brees, as athletic director jobs go, Greg Byrne has a pretty good one, but this year it may have been also one of the toughest. This week he showed us around the renovated Bryant-Denny Stadium after sitting down with us for a Saturday conversation on the Alabama process, leadership, and how his job has changed in 2020.
A picture-perfect game weekend in Tuscaloosa. Under a clear blue sky, the Alabama athletics crew is getting ready for game week and the debut of the new Bryant-Denny Stadium.
Well, there wasn't a playbook for this, right?
And continuing to adapt to the year that is 2020.
Basically tell our coaches that their seasons are done. Our seniors, some of their careers were done, even though some will be back, but a lot of them weren't able to make it back. So it's been a challenging time for everybody.
That part of this year may feel like years ago as fall ushers in a long hoped for football season and the debut of the new Bryant-Denny Stadium. The new player locker room sits just inside the north end zone. Byrne showing us his favorite new features.
It's going to be a great way to showcase the University of Alabama.
More luxury seating. The press box moved across the field to make way. An expanded recruiting room doubled in size. And the tunnel, where players and recruits will see Alabama football come to life. Byrne says this is just an investment in their success.
It is so critical, Jack, to continue to reinvest in your success. And you can't just say, hey, we're Alabama, we're going to be just fine. Our competition is not slowing down. And it's important that we continue to say, what are our next steps as a program to make sure we can compete and recruit at the levels that we expect here at Alabama. And we really think the steps that we've taken are very good for that long term.
Byrne says the Crimson Standard project is far from over. Along with making sure the football season goes off as best as it can, work continues on enhancing just about every other athletic facility on campus, too. 20,000 fans will be inside Bryant-Denny today. They'll get to judge the renovations for themselves. Brees.
And I'm sure fans had tons of questions for Greg Byrne about how this is all going to go down, especially with the capacity at Bryant-Denny Stadium. And speaking of questions, I know you fans have plenty of them. We're going to go deep into Twitter mailbag about what to expect for Alabama and Auburn in these big-time SEC matchups coming up today.
You're watching CBS CBS 42 College Football Saturday pregame, presented by Pepsi.
I don't think people understand what Kristen goes through sometimes to, get that penny to me, especially, this week we got a new grandbaby that she has to take care of, and, she had to go through a lot to get that penny to me, and I appreciate it.
Big smile from Nick Saban today, or Monday, talking about the tradition between he and his daughter, Kristen. 17 straight years now, they've barely missed a weekend where every Friday, Kristen gives her dad a newly minted of that year fresh penny with a special note. He's accumulated, I think, about $2 worth of pennies. I think it's been 200 games, and she's in Nashville now, so it's really strange and hard for her to get there. She made it work last week when they went to Columbia, Missouri on the plane, though.
I love to see Saban being a little superstitious. It shows that human element side to Saban that we don't often see,
He does something every week where it grabs your attention, right? Especially the way that Alabama looked against Missouri. Coach is going to have an opinion on that.
The worst thing you can do is, play poorly and win. And we played poorly in the second half. And I don't think anybody's immune from that. I've told the players that, so I'm not talking about them behind their back.
Saban's speaking it like it is, and so are the Tide fans taking to social media, the armchair quarterbacks, if you will. Surprising comment here from James Dotson. He disagrees with Coach, not that Coach cares, saying that playing poorly and losing is the worst thing. James says he should know because he's been a coach for 34 years, so he's got to know better than Saban, right?
I mean, how long has Saban been coaching? Probably 34 or more. You got to realize the thing about Nick Saban is it does not matter how his team plays. No. He loves, if you notice, the biggest, most passionate moments are when Alabama wins by 35 against a team they should beat by 36, and he's really upset.
Yes.
Those are his biggest coaching moments, and he loves to make a statement when that happens.
Yeah, and he makes those statements because players, they see his press conferences, they see his post-game comments, and he doesn't want them to get complacent. You hear that word so often from Nick Saban, don't get complacent. So yes, winning by 35 isn't enough. He wants to win by 45. He's always going to push the bar a little bit higher to get these guys to work even more.
And did you know it's basically a fact that Saban uses trigger words for his players when we're talking about the polls to the media? I got the brunt of that one about 4 years ago.
You sure did.
He uses these words that these players have in their mind, and they know to stay focused because their coach, they see it everywhere on national TV. Their coach is firing them up indirectly.
Yep, you're absolutely right. He knows how to get these guys motivated. He's been doing it for a long time. So James Dotson, I want to take a back seat on telling Coach how to coach.
Well, maybe he's got one coming up. We could maybe see on the postgame show. James, get it out there. Auburn and Georgia tonight. Between the hedges is a game between Gus Malzahn and Kirby Smart, where both guys really want their teams to be physical on defense, but that's because the offense were pretty porous. At least Georgia's was last week against Arkansas on the road, barely surviving when they got to the third quarter. So some opinions on that one?
Yeah, going back to the Twitter world, Todd tweets that tonight's game will be a defensive battle for sure. He says it looks like Gus is still calling the plays for the Tigers. And of course, fans are going to sound off on social media. You got to do what you got to do. But I personally, from watching the game, for me, I think Chad Morris was absolutely calling the plays.
This is the second hottest topic about Gus Malzahn every year. Number one is the hot seats.
Yep.
Number two is who is calling the plays.
Poor
Chad
Gus.
Morris, is he on the field? Is he up in the booth? Who cares where he is?
Right.
I think it's too early, way too early to tell who's calling the plays right now, because to me last week, this offense seemed pretty similar to what it was last year. The one thing that I noticed last week was a lot of guys touched the ball in the backfield. I think DJ Williams was the only one who had the most carries. He had 8 carries. Everyone else spread it out. That is not necessarily something that we've seen in the past from Gus's offense.
And another big thing that a lot of fans really don't take notice as much is the guys up front. They had 7 different players rotate in on the offensive line. They're still trying to figure out what the rotation is going to be, who the starting 5 is going to be, because that group was impacted by COVID in the preseason. So you got to back off a little bit, give Gus a little credit. Chad Morris and he are still meshing, getting it worked out, but they still have to figure out who their starters are up front. That's a huge part of the offense.
Including Alabama in late November. This might be the best defense that Auburn's going to face all year. Getting it in week 2, we have no idea what to expect. All right, next up, the Pac-12 got into this whole playing college football thing very late a few weeks ago. They just released their schedule actually this morning. So there's going to be a debate if the Pac-12 and even the Big Ten, should they even be in the college football playoff discussion?
Well, lots of SEC fans, of course, sounding off on this. And Lowell France, he describes himself as the #1 Tide fan, never heard that before, and says both of those conferences should be completely left out this year. In my opinion, Brees, on this one, is the reason that they try to get in on the back end here is to be a part of the college football playoff conversation. I mean, that's why they're trying to play football this season. So I think it's hard to leave out the two Power 5 conferences.
I agree with that on one side, but you know me for 5 years.
Yeah, I have.
I'm a fan of facts.
Yeah.
What are the facts of this
Huge
situation? 2016 was the last time the Pac-12 made the playoff.
Yeah.
Washington got walloped by Alabama. Outside of Ohio State, nobody has made the playoff in the Big Ten, and they have not been in the title game since 2014. Those two conferences are kind of irrelevant right now.
Yeah.
As much as you don't want to admit, Ohio State might be the best team in the country this year.
Sure.
They probably deserve to be in the playoff. I have no problem with the Pac-12 being left out. They should have a chance. I think playing a 7 to 8 game schedule like they are, depending on that final week, whatever you call it.
Yeah.
I think they should be allowed to play, and I agree with you. I don't think it's a problem they're starting in November. You have a big enough sample to where the playoff committee won't have an issue when you play 7 or 8 games.
Yeah, I think it gets down to, for teams, how fair is it? How fair is it if some teams are playing 7 or 8 games, the SEC is playing 10, potentially 11, going into the college football playoffs? How fair is that in terms of how guys are banged up or what they've been through in the season?
It's also not fair that the SEC has all of these big games in conference. Alabama, Texas A&M is one of them. So coming up on the pregame show, we're going to talk to somebody who's going to know this Texas A&M team very well, an affiliate station out there in Central Texas, about Texas A&M's matchup with Alabama, how they think they can win this game. It's coming up next.
You're watching CBS 42 College Football Saturday pregame, presented by Pepsi.
Game day in Tuscaloosa for the first time in 10 months, with the Crimson Tide hosting the Aggies of Texas A&M today in their home opener at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Another day, another maybe 1,000 or so pictures taken with the Nick Saban statue. We talked earlier about how he dominates his former assistants, taking on another one today in Jimbo Fisher, whose team really struggled in Week 1 against Vanderbilt. So I asked a guy who covers the team closely to grade the Aggies' performance.
You get a win, so you can start there, and you get a passing grade maybe, but it's not much above that. I can't see giving them much above a C, honestly, after what we heard so much about Kellen Mond and his development and the things that he's been doing this offseason. It looked like for the a lot of the game that was a lot of talk. I mean, he had a couple missed throws and some opportunities, but being loose with the football, 2 turnovers. That Aggie offense is certainly not what you'd expect in his 3rd year under Jimbo Fisher, his 4th year starting, because he started most of his freshman year with Kevin Sumlin too. So I don't think that many Aggie fans were sleeping real easy after that game against Vanderbilt, knowing what's coming down the pike on Saturday.
Mond is such a curious case, I think, studying him from the outside, because like you said, he's been the starter basically for 4 years now. What reason is there for us to believe that this is the year he takes that leap and becomes elite?
And I think that was the question we had for Jimbo and company, for those months where all we could do is ask questions and talk, and we can't see practice, and all we're getting is the video they're sending us out. That was the question all of us had, and I don't know that he really gave a resounding answer against Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt's defense is good, but you're a 30-point favorite. I mean, you need to take care of business in a game like that. A&M has been a middle-rung team in the SEC West, and they need to really put something on paper and something on tape that shows you that they can be and can compete with those teams in the upper crust there of the SEC West, especially now when you consider, hey, Mike Leach is at Mississippi State, and who knows, he's going to be a pain in their side like he was a pain in A&M's side in the Big 12. So you really do need to start seeing maybe not necessarily the wins in a game like this, but you have got to see the competitiveness take a step up in year 3 under Jimbo.
And that's Matt Roberts from our Next Star sister station in Central Texas, covering Texas A&M and Waco. Plenty more to come from experts from the SEC. 2 guys who live and breathe SEC football. Join Chris Brees coming up after the break.
You're watching CBS 42 College Football Saturday pregame, presented by Pepsi.
Some major changes in the AP Top 10 poll this week for a couple of reasons. Number one, Florida's win at Ole Miss jumps them up to number 3 in the polls, and the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are now able to be ranked. But look at Ohio State. They dropped from preseason 3rd to number 6 right now and getting a couple of first-place votes regardless. Time now to go inside the SEC. And with that, inside the SEC week number 2, we have our usual suspects back. Matt Zenitz, AL.com, Jason Caldwell from 24/7 Sports. Guys, it was hard to ignore what Mike Leach did last week to that, I call it porous LSU defense. They had a lot of question marks going into 2020. But Matt, do you think this is a Mississippi State team who can make some noise and get another big upset this year?
I don't even know if you can necessarily call it an upset if they do get another win like that. At this point, they look legitimately good. There wasn't some sort of fluke what they did against LSU. Mike Leach obviously has the track record that he does, especially from an offensive standpoint. Like we were talking about last week, this is maybe the best group that he's had to work with in terms of overall talent across the board, including from an offensive standpoint and including that ever important position for him in terms of the quarterback position with KJ Costello, who showed what he's capable of last week against that LSU defense.
Yeah, well, if Bo Pelini didn't know what a Mike Leach offense is going to look like, he's getting paid way too much to be a defensive coordinator. That was the thing to me. LSU still got some talent. They lost so much, and then you take Derek Stingley out of the mix. The issue with me is that they never adjusted, and I think it's more of an issue with LSU than Mississippi State's what they're going to be. They're going to be a tough out each week because you know what you're going to get. It's almost the reverse of Remember the Titans, where it's, that was by Novocaine. Well, this is, by lethal injection. They're just going to keep giving it to you over and over again, and you got to tackle. I agree with Matt. I don't know that it'll be an upset if they beat somebody else. I mean, that's a better football team than probably people imagine. For me, it was probably more defense. You know what to expect offensively. I thought their defense looked pretty good, and that was a defense that was terrible last year. So if they continue to play some defense and get the ball back to that offense, they'll beat some people.
And just the fact that they could win a game with 9 rushing yards was also just incredible to me. They're going to play Georgia coming up later on the schedule as a crossover into the East. In Georgia this week, going to have JT Daniels back. He was not cleared last week against Arkansas, and they clearly missed him. They are basically down to 4 quarterbacks, their 4th one last week when they call it barely squeaking by Arkansas the way they looked in the first 3 quarters. Jason, is JT Daniels going to make that big of a difference for Georgia tonight? The fact that he plays well, he doesn't play well, that could be on the line for them?
Yeah, if he plays. I'm not so certain that he's going to play. If it is, it may not be but a little. I mean, he got cleared, but it's cleared medically. I mean, this is a guy that's still coming back from a knee injury. So how much he can move, how well he can move, how much he trusts that knee, all those things are still in question at this point. So, I think he'll probably play. I would guess that Stetson Bennett's going to be the guy. He led that offense and he did a good job. He's a very seasoned guy. I don't know that JT Daniels is going to make a huge impact now. It may be felt more 2 or 3 weeks from now for them, maybe more so than against Auburn.
Are you buying that, Matt? You think JT Daniels, maybe if he's healthy or not, doesn't make that big of a difference? And could Bennett maybe steal the show for him?
Yeah, I'm right there with Jason. Jason stole my thunder a little bit. So I think the safe bet at this point is Stetson Bennett to get the start. So based on the information that I have at this point, it's unclear whether JT is going to get in at all. And I don't have a clear answer on that at this point. And obviously Stetson Bennett went in last week against Arkansas, albeit against an Arkansas defense that isn't one of the better defenses in the conference, but played at a respectable level and helped them pull away in that game. And honestly, and I think Jason will appreciate this comparison, but reminded me a little bit of former Auburn quarterback Sean White a little bit, just based on what he looked like in that game. So not the flashiest guy in the world, doesn't have the greatest measurables, but at the same time, a solid, dependable guy who went out there and did some good things and is capable of helping a team with a very good defense go out there and win. And
guys, why we love college football so much. People love overreacting, especially early on in the year. So your respective fan base, Matt for Alabama, Jason for Auburn, has the fan base overreacted just yet?
Not from an Alabama standpoint. We'll see what happens this week against Texas A&M.
No, not a whole lot of overreaction. I think people knew what to expect last week with Auburn and Kentucky. They knew it was going to be a challenge from that experienced team. I think for them, they were just, hey, got to win, move on, and knew that everything was now pointing toward week 2.
And we know something will happen down the line. That's why college football is so fascinating. Matt Zenitz, Jason Caldwell inside the SEC. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
And if you want to see the entire interview with Jason Caldwell and Matt Zenitz, you can go to our website, cbs42.com, click on sports. We'll be right back after this.
You're watching CBS 42 College Football Saturday pregame, presented by Pepsi.
You can make the case that the SEC's 4 new coaches all had successful debuts in some way. Of course, Mike Leach was the big winner with the win for State over LSU. Lane Kiffin brought excitement to Ole Miss's offense for the first time in forever, even though they lost to Florida. And a blowout loss for Arkansas against Georgia actually looked pretty good for the first 2.5 quarters, and Missouri showed glimpses of what they could be in that loss to Alabama. You know, we have a lot of great segments here on College Football Saturday, but this hasn't even happened yet, going to be our favorite one because we get to bring in, we call him our bear, we call him Joey Rogers, our producer, back for Producer Picks 2020 style. Joey?
Chris and Simone, I'm the producer. No one ever sees me on air. We last did this segment on Sports Sunday back in the spring, and obviously it got rave reviews, so we're bringing it back for the 2020 season. But no one wants to hear me talk, so let's get to the first topic. And it's SEC football. As you saw at the top of this block, 4 coaches made their SEC debuts last week. Obviously, Mike Leach had the most impressive debut, beating 6th-ranked LSU. But which of the 4 had the most encouraging debut? I think you can make a case for any of them.
Okay, for me on this, and I know what you're going to say, okay, but I think it's got to be Mike Leach, not just because he won, but he came into the SEC, a very difficult conference, a conference that's historically very defensive sound conference, came in with his Pac-12 offense that nobody said would work down here. Nobody said it would work.
True.
And he came down and he won. He put it to the reigning national champs, who aren't as good as they were last year, but still won the game, had set offensive records in the SEC. He said, "Hi there, my name's Mike Leach, and I'm back."
You took the right answer, but I hate low-hanging fruit.
Thanks.
Here's a fun one. Arkansas has lost 20 straight SEC games. Do you realize that? This team and the fan base is so desperate for anything to go their way. They looked pretty good for 2.5 quarters against Georgia, a team they're supposed to get destroyed by.
Bro.
They were so happy and elated that they thought they were dominating the line of scrimmage. They got killed in the end, yeah, but they are so ecstatic the fact that they think they can compete now because they haven't done it in 3 years.
Georgia looked worse than Arkansas looked good.
Well,
so.
we can maybe make that argument after the Auburn game. We
We'll
have no
see.
idea what's going to happen
We'll
tonight. We do have an idea of Joey's next topic. Joey, we're already smiling about this.
Like I said, I think you can make a case for any of them, but if I had to choose, I'd go with Lane Kiffin myself. That Rebels offense looked light years better than it did the last few seasons. Let's go to the next topic. It's around the country. Let the overreactions begin. Now that we have a small sample size for the 2020 season, which fan base should be most pumped and which should be most panicked? Simone, let's start with you.
Well, Joey, for me, I think he got for most pumped. You got to look at Miami. They've played a couple games. They have De'Aaron King, who comes over from Houston. You don't really know how he's going to fit in the system, coming from a group of 5 school. He comes in and he dominates. So I'm going to say that Miami fan base has every reason to be pumped. Who do you think?
That's a good one. Florida's used to being a top 5 team lately, but it never feels like they're a top 5 team. Now being number 3, they feel like they're legit. They feel like they can win the SEC East. That has everything to do with the mindset of the fan. They're so happy. They're so pumped. Panicking got to be Oklahoma. Just the fact that they've already lost at home to a team they were up by 20. Playoff aspirations. Every year they're finally dashed. And, oh, yeah, you got to play Oklahoma State and Texas still.
Panics for me, not because they should be, but because they probably are LSU fan base. They win a national championship. They dominate the conference in a lot of ways. They beat Alabama. They come in. They lose game 1. Hey, that's life without Joe Burrow.
Here's my question. Is Ed Orgeron going to be the next Gene Chizik? Joey?
I think Miami should probably be most pumped, although they do get Clemson next week. That's probably going to be an L. And LSU is in some real trouble this year if they don't play like they did last week. Final topic. It's bold prediction. What do you all think of this talking point I found on social media? 2020 will be UCF's best chance to make the college football playoff. Chris, we've heard this argument for the last few years about UCF getting in. What do you think?
Just because this year is different than 2017 was when they thought they should have won the national title and their pseudo title, this doesn't seem like there's any better chance for them. Now, you do got to realize that they are higher ranked now, number 11, than they ever were at any point in the 2017 season in the regular season. 12 was their highest. They're 11 now. They have a chance, but I don't think when you're going to beat Cincy, who may not even be ranked later in the year if they beat them, and Memphis, if that's a top 25 win, that's not good enough for me unless there's 2 losses from teams who are thinking about getting in. 2 losses, not 1.
At the end of the day, for me, they're not going to be in the playoffs until the playoffs expand and include teams that are not a Power 5 conference team.
Which they're not going to do this year.
Which they're not going to do, obviously. Heck, we didn't even know if we would have the playoffs to begin with. So if we have that, we should just be thankful for that. But no way that UCF is in now. And I mean, they're flirting with the top 10 and all. They're doing that so the fan base, just stays quiet down there in Florida.
The SEC's loving being in the playoff. You may like it, you may hate it. And they're loving being back on CBS 42 every week. And Tuscaloosa this week for the game of the week. That means Gary Danielson's talking here on College Football Saturday about X's and O's for Bama and Texas A&M and Auburn, Georgia. That's coming up next. But first, time to announce the winner of this week's College Football Watch and Win contest on CBS 42. It's John Quarles from Adamsville. Go to our website to see how you can win and what you can win. We'll be right back.
Watching CBS 42 College Football Saturday pregame, presented by Pepsi.
Well, the SEC on CBS crew comes into Tuscaloosa this week. 25 years of the SEC on CBS, and this by far is the most unique one we are ever going to see. Used to seeing Gary Danielson in person, but Gary, thanks for doing it a little different this year. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, I'm not dressed up yet, but I'm ready to go. I'll tell you that.
So if you're a coach on one of these teams and you're looking at game tape every single week, this is so unique this year. Week 2, the pandemic just hit. Practice was different this fall. Are Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban thinking that, or do they feel like they have enough tape to be prepared today?
Well, I think this whole changing of the schedule and COVID has affected this A&M team more than has affected Alabama. Alabama has a veteran team, very focused. They, not making the playoffs last year, probably due to a couple of injuries. An injury on defense with Dylan Moses, an injury to Tua halfway through the season really changed their team, lost a couple games, and didn't make something they're very used to doing. So they seem to be ready to go, and a lot of players return. If you look at the stats, Kellen Mond in the 2 games against Alabama has rushed for over 100 yards in both games. But the tailback position has gained like less than 30 yards in each game. They're getting no help for the quarterback, and it's not easy sledding against this Alabama team. No one runs the ball effectively against them unless they give a little bit of, something different. If you're just going to line up and go downhill, ask Leonard Fournette a couple years ago how that worked out against Alabama. It doesn't work very often.
He wouldn't give you a very happy answer, that's for sure. So, Gary, if we thought week 2, Alabama, Texas A&M was weird, Auburn, Georgia week 2 is certainly weird. Right. We're so used to November. Now you've got arguably the biggest game in the SEC for maybe the next 5, 6, 7 weeks played on week 2. And to me, it feels like you've got to win this game for Auburn or you're not going to the SEC title game. Do you feel that way too?
Well, especially because of where their schedule is. They've got a lot of tough games. They play at Alabama, and here they're playing at Georgia. They're playing 2 of the top, talent-wise, 5 teams in the country, both on the road. It's that year when they're going to do that. So I don't know if I'd be that abrupt about it, but they sure would be nice to win this football game going forward. Now, they're much improved at quarterback, but they're another team that needs to help Bo Nix running. I mean, when Gus Malzahn has a good football team, he has a team that can run the ball. And so far in that first game, that had to be a little bit of a red light, for Gus. I mean, Chad Morris has took over the team, and they've got good talent, and they throw the ball well. But they need to learn to run the ball better, I think, to beat Georgia in this football game.
Gary Danielson, CBS Sports, the new normal, joining us now on College Football Saturday. Gary, thanks so much. We'll see you soon.
My pleasure.
Well, the new normal, definitely going to be a new normal when it comes to injury reports in 2020 for college football really everywhere. Coaches under no obligation to say whether a guy is out for COVID concerns or any other reason. So for more on this, let's head out to Bryant-Denny Stadium where Drew Carter. Drew, how are teams handling this and what information can you give us going into this game?
Well, Simone, you mentioned that the injury report just feels a lot different this year, and you're right. It sounds like we're looking more for COVID-19 cases really than your typical injury you would think of with football. And so far, so good for the SEC. We're on week 2 here, the second Saturday of the fall, and there have been no major outbreaks for any teams, but there are some injuries to take note of. Georgia quarterback JT Daniels, the USC transfer, expected to be the starter after Jamie Newman opted out for the season. He is medically cleared to play for week 2 against Auburn, but the reports say they will not use him very much. Against that big defensive line for the Tigers, Big Cat Bryant says he will definitely play tonight against Georgia. He was limited last week with an ankle. And then here in Alabama, Nick Saban says D lineman Christian Barmore practiced all week. He will hopefully be able to contribute today against Texas A&M. Minor knee injury for Barmore along that Alabama defensive line. But again, the big news to report here with this injury report, no big news with COVID-19 outbreaks. We are ready to rock and roll for week 2 in the SEC. Our pregame show wraps up next. We go around the country with picks in major games and keys to the game for Bama and Texas A&M. It's all coming up after the break.
You're watching CBS 42 College Football Saturday pregame, presented by Pepsi.
You just know fans are still going to make the atmosphere at Bryant-Denny Stadium electric today for the Alabama-Texas A&M game. And they're going to see 2 head coaches who are among the best in the country. Did you realize that only 6 active coaches have won a national title? 2 of them meet today with Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban. A&M has never won an SEC West title, by the way. All right, pick'em time here on College Football Saturday. 2 teams who lost last week, Ole Miss and Kentucky, but perhaps have some promise in 2020. The winner of this game could certainly show that. Ole Miss on the road against Kentucky, 3 p.m. on the SEC Network. And Kentucky didn't have Joey Gatewood last week, the old Auburn transfer quarterback. Is cleared to play today. Is that enough to beat Ole Miss?
I'm going to go with Kentucky. I feel like they put up a really, really good fight on the road at Auburn. Maybe it's just because I got a chance to really see Kentucky play, but that's who I like, especially at Kentucky here. I think Ole Miss is still trying to really figure out the offense and things like that.
I think Ole Miss is going to go at it really angry, and they played a really good Florida team last week. The best defense they may face all year. Kentucky doesn't have nearly that. I'm going to go with Ole Miss to beat Kentucky on the road, and Lane Kiffin's train is moving along. The exact opposite of what's going on with Oklahoma in the Big 12 right now, because the way they lost to Kansas State last week, up by 20-plus points, and now they're so demoralized. They got to go on the road to an Iowa State team that, yeah, they did lose to Louisiana. We can't forget about that one either. Who do you got here? Oklahoma on the road against Iowa State.
For me, I feel bad for Iowa State because I think Oklahoma's going to come into week 2. Exactly. It's like, okay, Oklahoma's going to come into week 2 and say, we got to make up for that embarrassment last week. We've got to get a dub here.
Yeah, I mean, Oklahoma, Spencer Rattler, the quarterback, you feel bad for the guy because he's got to replace 3 fantastic quarterbacks who are lights out 3 years in a row, all of them transfers. He's been doing pretty well so far. I think Oklahoma's going to build up. Texas is going to be fascinating next week. I'm going to go Oklahoma as well over Iowa State. Get back on track at least for this week. In the ACC, we don't even know what to say at this point. I mean, Clemson's won 30-something games in a row. I think it's 32 games in a row they've won in the regular season. And this just seems like another game where, okay, who wants to be the team that's going to lose to Clemson and then, oh, yeah, go lose to them in the ACC title game? This is a rematch of the title game last year against Virginia. They're at home. We're not going to do pick 'em of the winner because we know who it is. How about the spread, though? 28.5 points. Clemson's the favorite.
That's steep, but I like it. I think that Clemson at home is the best Clemson that they will be, and I don't mind that. 28, I like it.
Yeah, they have nothing to lose when they know they're going to win, if that makes any sense. So they're going to put up a ton of points, and they're going to look really good at that. Clemson's going to have no problem today. What about Alabama taking on Texas A&M in a game that they're supposed to win handedly, but you know these tough SEC matchups can be tricky every year, especially early on in the year. And on paper, it seems like Bama's a huge favorite. Both teams, though, are going to go in with tons of positive energy. Both took care of business pretty well last week, except for maybe the debacle, you could say, for Texas A&M barely squeaking by Vanderbilt in a one-score game. So we look at the keys to the game tonight. Clearly, Kellen Mond is not going to get it done by just being a one-man show. They've got to run the football, which means you've got to contain Kellen Mond.
That's the thing with Kellen Mond. It's kind of like with Jimbo Fisher. You really never know what you're going to get. I think also offensively for Alabama, they got to go to their weapons. Jalen Waddle is clearly that weapon. He gets the ball more than he ever did in the past. You got to find him.
If it's not him, it's going to be Devontae Smith or somebody else. And protect Mac Jones. That's going to be the big key every week. Protect him. Get the ball to your playmakers. Alabama can look good against Texas A&M today. That's going to do it for the pregame show. We're back at 6 o'clock for a full hour. Nick Saban live in our postgame show after Alabama, Texas A&M.